The sound of the dryer ticking filled the small laundry room. I folded my granddaughter's onesie with practiced care, smoothing the edges, stacking it with the others. The scent of lavender fabric softener drifted in the warm air. I had just reached for a pair of tiny socks when I heard it. "You're not family. You only stayed because it was convenient." My daughter's voice was calm, not angry, not loud, just final. I froze. The socks slipped from my hands onto the floor. For a second, I thought maybe she wasn't talking about me. Maybe there was someone on the phone. Maybe. But then I heard her steps, closer. And the silence that followed. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My hands were suddenly too still, my breath too loud. I blinked, trying to keep my composure. The dryer buzzed, finishing its cycle. I had been living in this house for nearly 5 years. After Tom died, Julie asked me to move in, said it would help her with the baby, that we could support each other. She called it our home back then. I never asked for anything. Not rent, not favours, just a room at the back, and the joy of waking up to Ellie's laugh in the mornings. I folded clothes, cooked dinner, paid the electric bill when she was tight on money. I even made cinnamon bread on her birthdays, just like when she was little. But now, somehow, I wasn't family. I was convenient. I reached down, picked up the socks. My fingers trembled just slightly. Julie didn't say anything else. She walked away like she hadn't dropped a match in the middle of a dry field. I stared at the folded pile of baby clothes. They looked so small, so trusting. And I felt small too, I whispered, almost to myself. So what was I before I became convenient? My voice got lost in the hum of the ceiling fan. I wanted to scream or cry or laugh bitterly. But instead, I folded the last onesie, stacked it carefully, and placed the basket by the door. Because when you're not seen as family anymore, you don't get to fall apart. You stay useful, you stay quiet. But somewhere, something in me cracked, and it would not stay quiet forever. I didn't move much that night. After folding the baby clothes, I went back to my room, the one at the end of the hallway, next to the garage, with the window that never fully shuts. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed I'd brought from my old house, and I stared at the dresser where I kept a single photo of Tom. Tom would have known what to say, or more likely, what not to say. That's who he was, gentle, quiet, and kind in the ways people often overlook. He died 6 years ago. Cancer, too fast, too brutal. The house we lived in became too big without him, too quiet. Julie had just separated from her husband back then. She was pregnant and scared. I remember the night she called me, voice cracking, saying she didn't know how to do this alone. Of course, I moved in. I sold the house Tom and I built together, the one with the porch swing and the hydrangeas out front. I didn't even think twice. Julie told me I wouldn't have to worry about anything, that this was my home too, that we'd raise her daughter together. And for a while, we did. I was there the night Ellie was born. I held Julie's hand when she screamed through labour. I was the first to wash Ellie's tiny clothes. I learned how to install car seats. I stayed up rocking her when she had colic and Julie couldn't take one more sleepless hour. I didn't keep track of the things I did. That's what mothers do. We give, and then we forget we gave because the giving felt natural. Over time, the house filled up again. Julie met Nathan. They got married. He was quiet at first, polite. But polite isn't the same as warm. My room never changed. I didn't complain when it became the storage area too. I didn't say anything when they accidentally left me out of dinner plans, or when I started being the only one cleaning up after Sunday lunch. I thought maybe it was just life moving forward. But now I wondered, had I misunderstood the invitation all along? Was I really family? or just a useful placeholder until things got easier for her. I picked up the planner Tom gave me on our last anniversary. The pages were almost full grocery lists, appointments, little notes like Ellie's first word, sock. On the last page, a faint sentence he'd scribbled during chemo. Love isn't kept. It's returned. That night, I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel at home. Not even in the room I helped them pay for. Not even in the house I gave up my life to keep afloat. The kettle hadn't even begun to boil when I noticed it. On the counter, next to the sink, sat a list. Handwritten, slanted letters that weren't mine. Baby wipes, oat milk, carrots, trash bags. At the bottom, scribbled in red pen, ask Mom to clean out her room this weekend. My hand hovered above the kettle. The click of the gas igniter was still echoing. Ask Mom to clean out her room. Not ask if she wants help. Not talk to Mom. Just a task, like I was an item on the to-do list. I didn't touch the paper. I just stared at it, the steam beginning to rise behind me. Julie came into the kitchen a few minutes later, still in her work-from-home sweatshirt, holding Ellie's lunchbox. She didn't look at me, just moved around the room like I wasn't standing there. When she opened the fridge and frowned, I finally said it. There's some of the soup left from last night. She looked at me, not with anger, not with affection, just mild surprise. Oh, I thought you were still in bed, she replied. I was. Got up early. A pause, then she added, almost too casually, Nathan and I were thinking of turning the back room into a little creative space for Ellie. You know, art supplies and a reading corner. She loves it in there. She didn't say your room. She said the back room, like I was already gone. I see, I said, voice steady. There was so much more I could have said. About the years I'd spent with Ellie, building that very room into a space she already loved, about how I gave up my garden, my neighbours, my porch swing, but instead I walked to the sink, poured water into my mug, and stirred in the tea. When you realise you've become a ghost in someone else's house, you learn how to disappear quietly. Later that morning, Ellie came running to me, asking if I could fix the button on her doll's dress. I sat with her on the floor, sewing it back carefully. She asked, Grandma, if I get big, will you still be here? I looked at her and smiled. I'll always be somewhere close, I said, and I meant it, even if I wouldn't be close in the way she was used to. That afternoon, I opened the hallway closet to look for my sewing kit. A plastic storage bin caught my eye labelled in black marker. Mom's things, to sort later. It wasn't my handwriting. Inside were my winter scarves, a few photo albums, and the recipe box Tom and I used when we first married. Cinnamon bread, his favourite. My mother's meatloaf. A note he once tucked between the cards. Burnt or not, I'll eat anything you make. I stood there, holding the note in my palm like it still held warmth. Julie had boxed it all up, quietly, without a word. She must have done it over the weekend while I was taking Ellie to the park. The room was tidier than usual when we came back, but I hadn't thought much of it. Now I understood. They were preparing for me to leave without ever asking if I was ready, or if I wanted to. That evening, I stayed quiet through dinner. Nathan talked about some project at work. Julie nodded, scrolling on her phone between bites. When Ellie finished her broccoli, she whispered, Grandma, can I sleep in your room tonight? Julie cut in quickly. Not tonight, sweetie. We need to start thinking about boundaries. Remember what we talked about? Ellie looked confused. I smiled gently, brushing her hair back. It's okay, love. Maybe another night. But inside, something shifted. Not anger, not sadness, something quieter. A line being drawn in a place I didn't know had lines. Later, after everyone went to bed, I returned to the hallway. I pulled down the storage bin, carried it into my room, and opened it on the bed. Each object was a version of me they no longer needed. I laid the cinnamon bread recipe on top. Then I picked up my planner and opened to a fresh page. Date, Monday. Time, 10:13 p.m. Entry, they are moving forward. I must decide if I will stay behind or move differently. I stared at the sentence, then wrote under it, I am not just convenient, I am still real. The walls of the room felt closer that night, but my words on that page made it feel like I'd carved out space for myself again, even if no one else left room. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen just before 7, the same time I always did. Sunlight was just beginning to edge through the blinds, turning the floor tiles a soft orange. I reached for the kettle but paused. From the hallway, voices floated in soft, but close. I didn't mean to listen. I truly didn't. But when your name is said like a problem, your ears catch it before your heart can defend itself. She's still here, Nathan whispered. A pause. Julie sighed. I told you. I'm figuring it out. She'll take the hint eventually. He muttered something I didn't catch. Then, clearer, it's just awkward. She's always there. Julie sounded tired. Well, she doesn't have anywhere else. You know that. My breath caught. I didn't step back. I didn't move. I stood there with my hand on the kettle and a silence so loud it almost cracked the air. Not anywhere else. Not anyone else. Just here. Always there. Always available. Like a spare chair no one wants to sit in but doesn't throw away. I turned the kettle on quietly, the flame clicking into life. The voices faded as they moved into the living room. A few minutes later, Julie entered the kitchen like nothing happened. She smiled faintly. Morning? I returned it. Morning. My voice didn't tremble. That surprised me. She poured herself some coffee, then walked off to get Ellie ready for school. I stood at the kitchen counter, watching the steam rise. Then I saw it, just to the left of the sink, the small blue tulip teacup, the one I always used. This time it had lipstick on it, Julie's shade. She'd used it. It was a small thing, really, a cup, a choice. But I'd used that cup every morning since I moved in, and for the first time, someone else had taken it without asking, without thought. It wasn't the cup. It was the fact that I was fading, piece by piece, one teacup, one drawer, one planner, one word. I rinsed it silently, placed it in the dish rack, and chose a plain white mug instead. That morning, I sat on the back steps with my tea, watching the birds scratch at the feeder I'd hung 3 years ago. Nobody remembered I was the one who put it there, or that I filled it every week. But they came anyway, wings beating, heads twitching, always returning. Not for me, just for the seed. I watched them, then whispered, That's all I've become too, isn't it? Just the one who refills the seed. That afternoon, I set the table for lunch, just the usual grilled cheese for Ellie, leftover pasta for Julie and Nathan. I moved quietly, like I always did. By then, it had become habit. My steps barely made a sound on the tile. I knew where every creaky floorboard was, how to open the pantry without letting it thump. It was only after I set the forks down that I realised there were only 3 plates, not 4. Julie walked in, glanced at the table, and didn't blink. You already ate, right? She said casually. I nodded, though I hadn't. I did. She smiled quickly. Perfect. Then turned to call for Nathan. As I stepped back into the hallway, my hand grazed the old planner again, still open from last night's entry. I paused, then, slowly, I sat down and flipped back to a page from last year. It was one of the only entries in Julie's handwriting back when she'd borrowed the book to track Ellie's sleep schedule. Scrawled in blue pen, Mum stayed up with her again. I don't know how she does it. A small note, a passing thought, but it used to mean something. I closed the planner. That evening, my niece Rachel called. I hadn't heard her voice in months. "Auntie, I found that old lemon cake recipe of yours." She chuckled. "Remember when you used to bring it to every birthday, whether we asked or not?" I laughed gently. "You all pretended to hate it, but it was always gone in 10 minutes. Rachel paused, then asked quietly, "How are you, really?" No one had asked me that in a long time. I almost said, "I'm fine." Almost. But then I heard my own voice in the planner, echoing from the sentence I wrote last night. I am not just convenient, I am still real. So I told her, not everything, but enough, that I was still here, that the house had changed, that sometimes it felt like I was just wallpaper with a pulse. Rachel didn't rush to fix it, she just listened. Before we hung up, she said, "If you ever want to come visit, you know you don't need a reason. Or permission." It was such a small offer, but it cracked something open. Not because I had nowhere to go, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone reminded me that I had a choice. That night, after the house had gone quiet, I stepped into the hallway to refill my water. The walls, dimly lit by a single nightlight near Ellie's room, cast soft shadows across the floor. As I passed the kitchen, I heard it. A voice. Julie's. Low. Strained. "I just didn't think she'd stay this long." I stopped. My hand tightened around the glass. Nathan's voice followed. "I get it, but she sold her house. For you." Julie let out a sharp exhale. "I didn't ask her to do that." There was silence. Then she added, "She's too much sometimes, always in the background, always doing things I didn't ask for." Nathan was quiet. Then, softly, "She raised you, and Ellie adores her." Julie's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I know, but she makes me feel like I'm not the mother here." I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. In my room, I sat down at the edge of the bed, not crying, not shaking, just still. I finally understood. It wasn't that I had done too little, it was that I had done too much. And in doing so, I had become a mirror Julie didn't want to look into. To her, I was a reminder of what she wasn't ready to be. And perhaps, of the love she didn't know how to receive. I thought of the way she pulled away when I reached out to hug her, how she flinched when I corrected Ellie gently, how she smiled tighter every time someone said, "Your mum's amazing. I hadn't meant to take space. I just didn't know how to be small when loving someone." The blue tulip teacup sat beside my planner. I turned it in my hands, running a thumb over the faded flower. Then, for the first time, I flipped to the very first page of the planner. Tom's handwriting. A note he had written when he gave it to me. "For all the things you give that go unseen." My throat tightened. Some gifts are invisible, until they're resented. I closed the planner gently. Then I stood, walked to the closet, and pulled out my overnight bag, not out of spite, not out of drama, but because now I finally understood where I stood, not unloved, just misrecognized, and maybe the kindest thing I could do was to leave before I turned into someone she'd regret forever. The morning came quietly. I woke before the sun, as always. The light hadn't yet crept past the blinds, and the house was still breathing in that soft, unguarded way it did when everyone was asleep. I didn't rush. I folded my nightgown, smoothed the bed, zipped the overnight bag I'd packed the night before. There wasn't much to take, just clothes, my planner, the blue tulip teacup, wrapped gently in a scarf, and one envelope. I had found it tucked between old tax documents last year, Tom's last letter, not to me, to Julie. He must have written it during the final weeks, when he could barely hold a pen. I hadn't known about it until after he passed. I hadn't shown it to her. I don't know why. Maybe I thought the right moment would come. This morning felt like that moment. I placed it on the kitchen counter just beneath her mug and wrote on top in small letters, "You don't have to read this, but I hope you will." I didn't expect a thank you. I just hoped she'd pause long enough to remember that there was a time when she and I weren't on opposite sides of a doorway. I set my bag by the front door and stood there for a while. The air smelled like toast from the timer I had set earlier. One last thing. Habit or kindness, I wasn't sure anymore. I thought I'd leave quietly, but Ellie's small voice broke the silence. "Grandma?" She stood at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes, her blanket trailing behind her. "You're leaving?" I nodded slowly. "Just for a little while." She took a few steps down, then stopped. "Are you mad at Mommy?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart, I'm just giving everyone more space." She looked at me, confused. "But I like when you're here." I felt my heart pinch, but I bent down and opened my arms. She ran into them. I held her tight, not like someone leaving forever, just like someone who loved her enough to know that sometimes love also means stepping away. "I left you something," I whispered, "in your art drawer. It's small, but it's just for you." She didn't ask what it was, just nodded, solemn like children do when they understand more than adults think. Nathan appeared at the hallway's edge, surprised to see me dressed, bag packed. He didn't speak, but when our eyes met, he gave a quiet nod, and that was enough. Julie came downstairs just before 8. She was still in her robe, hair pinned up messily, scrolling her phone as she reached the bottom step. She moved on autopilot, set the mug on the counter, turned towards the cabinet. That's when she saw the envelope. She hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the handwriting. "You don't have to read this, but I hope you will." She picked it up like it might sting, then turned it over. The paper was aged, yellowed at the corners. Her name was written on the front in ink she hadn't seen in years. She froze. Then she sat down. For a moment, she didn't open it, just stared at it, like she could hear his voice through the folds. Finally, with a slow breath, she tore it open. Inside, a single sheet, Tom's handwriting, stilted, slightly crooked, the writing of someone whose hands were giving out. "Julie, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to tell you everything I wanted to. I asked your mother not to share this unless she felt it was time. I know you think your mother is strong. She is. But she's also soft. Softer than she'll admit. If she moved in with you, it wasn't out of convenience. It was out of love. And maybe out of needing to still feel needed. You're going to have a daughter. You'll understand that someday. Don't push her away, because she does too much. That's how she shows she's still alive. And if she ever leaves, let her know she was always family, even when you couldn't say it." Julie blinked hard. The paper shook slightly in her hand. She reached for her coffee, but her hand missed the handle. She stood up abruptly, searching the room like Irene might still be there, just out of view. But the house was silent. Her eyes landed on the planner, left behind on the table. Next to it, a folded note. "Ellie's lunch is packed. There's banana bread in the tin. I'll check in soon." "Mom," Julie's breath hitched. A beat passed, then 2. She picked up the planner, held it close. Nathan walked in, buttoning his shirt. "Everything okay?" Julie didn't answer right away. She looked up slowly. "She left." Nathan frowned. "You sure?" Julie nodded, then added, almost to herself, "She didn't take the planner." It was just past noon when the doorbell rang. Julie, still in leggings and a loose sweater, opened the door to find their neighbour, Mrs. Harmon, standing on the porch with a small cardboard box. "Found this outside earlier," the older woman said. "It was left near your mailbox. Looks like someone dropped it off while you were out yesterday." Julie blinked, then took the box. Thanks. I didn't see anything this morning. Mrs. Harmon offered a knowing smile. Mothers always leave something, even when they say they won't. Julie didn't answer, just nodded and closed the door slowly. She set the box on the kitchen table. It was light. No return address. Inside, a single manila envelope. Her name was written on the front, again in her mother's handwriting. This time there was no note, just the enclosed documents. She slid them out carefully. Her heart was already tightening. Bank records, copies of checks, a notarized letter. Julie sat down as her eyes began to scan. It was all there. Evidence that her mother had been quietly paying half the mortgage for nearly 2 years. A cancelled cheque from 6 months ago. $4,000 paid directly to the daycare when Julie and Nathan were struggling. A letter from the lawyer who handled Tom's estate. One line highlighted in yellow. Per request of the deceased, a portion of the house equity was to be reserved for Julie Ann Myers in the event her mother chose to reside with her. Julie covered her mouth. Everything she'd accused her mother of, staying out of guilt, or for comfort, or convenience, was a lie. She hadn't stayed because she had nowhere else to go. She'd stayed because she was still protecting them, quietly, legally, lovingly. Nathan stepped into the room, saw her frozen. "What is it?" Julie handed him the papers. He read slowly, his brows furrowed, then softened. "I didn't know," he murmured. "She never said anything." Julie shook her head, her voice barely audible. "She didn't want us to feel obligated. She just wanted to help." There was silence between them, heavy. Julie whispered, "I told her she wasn't family." Nathan sat beside her, gently set the planner on the table. "Maybe it's not too late to tell her she is." Julie looked down at the empty blue teacup. It had been sitting there all morning. She reached for it, held it in both hands, and for the first time in days, let herself cry. The walls in my new apartment were thin, not in the way that bothered you with noise, but thin enough to remind you there was life happening on the other side. I didn't mind it. It made me feel less alone. The place was modest, 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchenette, and a small window that looked out onto a courtyard. A few birds had already found their way to the ledge, curious and persistent. I left crumbs on purpose. I hadn't told many people I'd moved, just Rachel and a friend from the library book club I used to attend. I didn't want calls. I didn't want explanations. I just wanted stillness. That afternoon, while sorting through my bag, I found the folded paper Ellie had slipped into my palm before I left. I hadn't read it at the time. I didn't want to cry in front of her. Now I unfolded it slowly. Crayon lines in soft purple and blue, a drawing of our old living room. 2 stick figures sitting on the floor. One was labelled me, the other Grandma. Between them, a doll and a cookie. Above, written in shaky letters, "I remember when we were happy. I remember you." I pressed the note to my chest. In the silence, something broke, not painfully, quietly, like a ribbon snapping in the wind, and that's when the phone rang. Not mine. The old landline I'd forgotten I still had. I answered. There was a long pause before a voice spoke. "Julie." "Mom?" Just the sound of her saying that word made my throat tighten. "I found your letter and the bank papers," she said. Her voice was uneven. I didn't know about any of it. I didn't respond right away. She continued. "I said things that I didn't mean. Or maybe I meant them, but I didn't understand what I was really saying." Silence. Then I was scared. Of being compared to you. Of never being enough for my own daughter. I took it out on you because you were always there. I sat down slowly. My hand still held Ellie's drawing. "I think," Julie said, voice trembling, That I started pushing you away the moment I realised Ellie ran to you before me when she scraped her knee. There it was. The real reason. Not hate. Not anger. Fear. I could have spoken. I could have forgiven her right then. But instead, I let the quiet stretch. Not out of punishment, but because sometimes silence is the only language left that carries the weight of everything. The letter arrived the next morning, slipped quietly under my door like someone wasn't sure they were allowed to knock. No return address, just my name written in careful cursive, like the way Julie used to label her school folders when she was 8. I picked it up slowly, half expecting it to vanish in my hands. Inside was a single page, no greeting, no apology. Just truth. I used to dream about being a mother, but I didn't dream about having to share that space with anyone else. When you moved in, I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was strong enough to do it alone, but I never really was. You didn't just help with Ellie. You filled the cracks I didn't even know were there, and somewhere along the way, I resented you for that. Not because you hurt me, but because you made it clear, without trying, that I still had so much to learn. My eyes blurred halfway through. Julie had always been guarded, strong. She learned it young, after her birth mother left. I had stepped in when she was 10, married her father, packed school lunches, sat through piano recitals, stayed up with her through the flu, but I was never called Mom. Not out loud. I never asked to be, and yet I had loved her like my own. The letter continued. I think part of me believed that if I kept some distance, I could protect myself. I wouldn't owe you anything. I wouldn't have to admit how much you mattered. But I see it now, and I'm sorry. I can't take back what I said, but I want to try to unsay it, slowly, if you'll let me. Ellie asks about you every night. Yesterday, she whispered, Grandma still fits in our house. She's right. At the bottom, she hadn't signed her name. Just, still your daughter, if you'll have me. I folded the letter and held it against my chest. I didn't cry this time, not because it didn't hurt, but because something steadier was taking its place. Recognition, not loud, not public, but finally real. A knock came gently at the door a few hours later. Not Julie, just the mail carrier. But for a second I wondered. I didn't open the door, not yet, but I did walk to the pantry and pull out the cinnamon, flour, and the old tin of baking soda I'd brought from the house. Some silences don't need filling, but some deserve the scent of warm bread to begin again. Nathan sat on the stairs that evening, elbows on his knees, a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside him. The house was quiet. Too quiet. In the living room, Ellie sat cross-legged on the carpet, crayons scattered around her like petals. She was humming, focused on her drawing. Julie stepped into the room, holding a folded blanket. Her eyes scanned the space, settled on the teacup still sitting beside the planner, untouched since morning. She crossed the room, picked it up slowly, then paused. Mum never left it out before, she murmured. Nathan glanced at her. Maybe she meant to. Julie sat down beside him. Her voice was soft. I wrote to her. He nodded. Good. She hasn't called back. She might not. Julie looked down at her hands. Do you think I waited too long? Nathan hesitated, then said, No, but I think you were waiting for the wrong reason. She turned toward him, brows furrowed. You were waiting for her to make it okay. Again. He looked at her gently. Maybe it's your turn. Julie didn't respond. She stared straight, ahead, into the quiet space where her mother used to sit each evening with a book, or with Ellie pressed to her side. Ellie suddenly stood, walked over and handed Julie the drawing. It was 2 figures again, stick figures, hand in hand. Julie smiled. Is this us? Ellie shook her head. It's me and Grandma. Julie swallowed. Ellie added, I didn't know what colour her shirt is now, so I just used purple. She used to wear purple when we baked. Julie blinked. That's right. She likes purple. Then Ellie leaned in, almost conspiratorially. I think she's sad. Julie looked up. Why do you say that? Ellie shrugged, as if it were obvious. Because you didn't tell her to come back yet. Julie froze. Not ask, not forgive. Just tell her, like a child would. Simply, Julie stood, walked toward the drawer where the family photos were kept. She hadn't opened it in months. She pulled out an old picture, her wedding day. Irene was standing just behind her, holding Ellie in one arm, her other hand lightly resting on Julie's back. The smile wasn't big, but it was steady. Julie stared at it. I think, she said slowly, I made room for help, but never for her. Nathan stood beside her. You can still change that. Julie nodded, voice almost inaudible. I don't want Ellie to grow up thinking that love should be temporary. The bell above the bakery door let out a soft chime as it opened. Irene looked up from the sink, drying her hands with a towel, steam still curling from the tray of fresh cinnamon bread cooling by the counter. She didn't expect to see Julie. Not here. Not now. But there she was, standing just inside the doorway, holding a small white envelope, and looking like a woman rehearsing a speech that had already slipped away. Irene didn't speak. She waited. Julie stepped forward slowly, her fingers tightening around the envelope. I wasn't sure you'd be here, she said softly. Irene nodded. I'm here. Julie glanced around. You opened it. Irene offered a gentle shrug. A friend of Rachel's let me use the space. It's small, but it smells like my childhood, so I figured, why not? She wiped her hands again, as if unsure what else to do with them. Julie looked down at the tray. Cinnamon bread. Irene smiled faintly. Still remember how to burn the edges perfectly. Julie didn't laugh, but something in her face cracked, just a little. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the envelope. This is from Ellie, she said, and from me. Irene didn't reach for it. She let Julie place it on the counter between them, next to the tray. I'm not here to ask you to come back, Julie added quickly. I'm here because I should have come sooner. Irene nodded again, quietly. Thank you. There was a pause, one of those tender silences too fragile to break. Julie cleared her throat. Ellie keeps drawing you. Yesterday she drew the pantry and wrote, Grandma keeps us full. Irene blinked, the words landing softly but deeply. She hadn't realised how much space she'd taken up in Ellie's world, how visible she'd been through a child's eyes. Julie looked away. I didn't see what she saw. I think I didn't want to. There it was, not a full apology, but something real, something enough. Irene finally picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. I'm not angry, she said gently. I was never angry, just tired of needing to prove I belonged. Julie nodded, eyes wet. You did, even when I forgot to say it. Another silence passed. Then, Julie reached into her other pocket and pulled out something small and cool, a silver key. She set it beside the envelope. Just in case you ever want to come home, it's still yours. Irene didn't answer. She simply looked down at the items before her, the key, the envelope, the scent of cinnamon rising like memory, and for the first time, she let herself imagine walking back through a door not as an obligation, but as someone wanted. Nathan stood by the window that evening, a lukewarm cup of coffee in one hand, Irene's old planner in the other. The garden outside was quiet now, just patches of thyme and rosemary, some long wilted, others stubbornly holding on. He hadn't realised how much she'd planted until she was gone. Not just herbs, not just meals, but rhythm, presence, warmth. He flipped through the planner again. Most pages were filled with notes in Irene's soft, looping script. Appointments, grocery reminders, little smiley faces beside Ellie's milestones. And then, tucked near the back, he found a page folded in half. Curious, he opened it. At the top, a line written in darker ink than the rest. In case I go, but forget to say it. His fingers stilled. Below it, a list. Not tasks, not instructions, just sentences, almost like prayers. Ellie prefers 2 bedtime stories when she's scared. Don't skip the second one. Nathan's coffee tastes better when he uses the cinnamon trick I taught him. He doesn't know I noticed he liked it. Julie cries in silence. She gets that from me. If they feel I've overstayed, remind them love never checks the calendar. Nathan sat down, the planner heavy in his hands. No accusation, no bitterness, just quiet care. Left behind like light from a candle no one noticed had burned down. He looked out again at the garden. The feeder Irene installed still hung from the tree branch. Empty now. Ellie wandered in, clutching a book. "Daddy, will you read to me?" He smiled. "Of course, sweetheart." She climbed into his lap and held up the cover. It was one Irene used to read aloud. Ellie paused before opening it. "Can we do it like Grandma, with the silly voice?" Nathan chuckled. "I'll try." Halfway through the story, Ellie interrupted. "Daddy?" "Yes." She didn't take her garden stuff. Nathan looked up. "What do you mean?" "The little shovel and the watering can. They're still in the bin." He nodded slowly. "Maybe she left them for us." Ellie considered that. "So we don't forget?" "Maybe," he said, then added, "or maybe so we remember how to take care of things." She smiled and leaned into his chest. As he continued reading, his eyes kept drifting back to the planner beside him. The last line on the page read, "If I'm gone, it doesn't mean I disappeared. It just means I trusted you to remember." The knock on the bakery's back door was soft, almost unsure. Irene glanced up from the dough she was kneading. Her hands were dusted with flour, her apron slightly damp. Another knock. She wiped her hands slowly, then opened the door. Julie stood there, her coat unbuttoned, wind tousling her hair. She held nothing this time. No letter, no key, no envelope. Just herself. "I didn't come to ask you to move back in," she said gently. "I came to ask if you'd show me how to make it." Irene tilted her head, unsure. "Make what?" Julie offered a small smile. "The cinnamon bread. The one I never learned because I was always too busy. Being busy." For a moment, neither of them moved. The past still sat between them like flour on a countertop, soft, white, impossible to gather back in once it had settled. Irene stepped aside. "Come in." Julie did. She removed her coat, looked around. The space was warm, filled with the smell of rising dough and the faintest trace of cardamom. Irene handed her a clean apron. Julie took it, then paused. "You used to hum when you made this," she said. "I remember. Some old folk song." Irene chuckled. "Your father used to make fun of my humming, said I sounded like a kettle about to boil." Julie smiled, eyes soft. "I miss his laugh." They worked side by side, kneading, folding, measuring. Julie's hands clumsy at first, but steadying. At one point, Irene reached over, gently guiding Julie's fingers. "Not too hard," she said. "Let the dough breathe." Julie looked up. "That's what you always did, didn't you? With me. You let me breathe." Irene didn't answer, but her hand rested on Julie's a moment longer than necessary. As the bread went into the oven, the silence between them shifted. No longer heavy, just shared. Julie leaned against the counter. "I never asked why you didn't defend yourself when I said what I did." Irene wiped her hands again, "Because sometimes Silence speaks louder than defense, and I knew I wasn't the one who needed convincing. Julie swallowed hard. I didn't mean to say it like that. I know, Irene said, gently cutting her off. I know. The oven timer clicked. They both turned. The smell filled the room. Warm, nostalgic, almost healing. Julie stepped forward, hesitated, then wrapped her arms around her mother's shoulders. It wasn't a dramatic embrace, just steady, quiet, like bread rising, unseen, but inevitable. The sunlight fell gently across the back garden, filtering through the kitchen window and onto the floorboards. Warm as breath, Ellie stood just beyond the porch steps, a tiny watering can in her hand, eyebrows furrowed in deep concentration. Irene watched from inside, her hands cupped around a mug of chamomile tea. The steam rose slowly, curling around the rim of her favourite white cup. The blue tulip teacup had stayed behind, and that felt right somehow. She stepped outside, her cardigan wrapped loosely around her, the morning air still holding a trace of chill. Is it time? Ellie asked, her small voice breaking the quiet. For what? Irene smiled. For planting them, Ellie said, pointing to the small packet of tulip bulbs cradled in her palm. Irene knelt beside her, the ground soft and freshly turned. Not just yet, she said. Tulips are patient. They go in the ground now, but they take their time. You won't see them for a while. Ellie tilted her head. Like you? Irene blinked. What do you mean? You were here, and then not here, but you came back, like the flowers. Irene didn't answer right away. She reached out, helping Ellie loosen the soil. Maybe, she said softly. But sometimes we come back as something new, something not everyone expects. Ellie nodded as if she understood. Children always understand more than they're given credit for. Inside, Julie stood at the window, watching them. She held a photo in her hand, one of Irene from years ago, seated at the same spot in the garden. A much younger Julie crouched beside her, holding a seed packet. She hadn't remembered that day until now, but the image, her own small face tilted toward Irene's, mirroring trust, struck her like a forgotten dream. Nathan stepped up behind her. That photo? He asked. Julie held it up. I used to think she was trying to replace my mum. Nathan stayed quiet. Julie continued. But now I see she wasn't trying to take anyone's place. She was just showing me there was still room in mine. She turned from the window and walked towards the door. Outside, Ellie looked up. Can I plant the blue ones? There's no such thing, Irene said gently. Not really. Blue tulips don't grow in the wild. They're imagined. Ellie grinned. Then let's imagine one. Julie stepped onto the porch just in time to hear it. Her eyes met Irene's, and for once, there was no need for translation. Irene extended the small trowel. Julie accepted it with both hands. And together, 3 generations pressed a dream into the earth. The bell above the bakery door gave its usual soft chime. Irene looked up from the register, expecting a familiar face, perhaps Mrs. Harmon from 2 blocks over, or that young woman who always asked for just the edges of the cinnamon bread. But it wasn't either of them. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, stood in the doorway, her cheeks flushed pink from the autumn wind. She had a few freckles across her nose and a notebook clutched tightly in one hand. Behind her, a man, likely her father, waited by the door, phone in hand, glancing around politely, but letting his daughter take the lead. The girl stepped up to the counter. Excuse me, she said, soft but clear. Are you the one who makes the Ellie's cinnamon? Irene smiled. That's me. The girl lit up. My teacher said your bakery has a story behind every loaf. Irene chuckled. Well, your teacher's not wrong. The girl's eyes widened. What's the story behind that one? She pointed to the tray labelled Ellie's cinnamon, soft centre, extra crust. Irene looked down at the roll, then back at the girl. "It's named after someone very special," she said. "A little girl who reminded me what it means to stay, even when it hurts." The girl blinked. "Did she run away?" "No," Irene replied gently. "She stayed, and she remembered me even when the grown-ups forgot who I was." The girl paused, like she was trying to piece that together. Then she nodded, satisfied. "I think remembering is harder than math," Irene laughed softly. "You might be right." The girl fidgeted with her notebook. "I'm writing a story," she said, "about someone who was invisible, but only because everyone else forgot how to look." Irene's breath caught for just a second. "Do they see her again?" she asked. "I don't know yet," the girl replied. "Maybe someone new shows up, or maybe someone old just finally looks." Irene leaned forward, her voice almost a whisper. "If you want, you can put this in your story, that sometimes the best people aren't loud, they just leave something warm behind." The girl nodded solemnly and scribbled something into her notebook. Her father called softly from the door. "Ready?" She waved to Irene. "Bye. Thank you for the story." "Thank you," Irene said, "for reminding me." As they left, she stood alone behind the counter, the tray still warm, the scent of cinnamon thick in the air. She opened her planner, the one she'd finally brought back home, and on a blank page, she wrote down the sentence the girl had said about someone who was invisible, but only because everyone else forgot how to look. Then, just below it, in smaller writing, "Until one day, someone remembered out loud." She closed the planner, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. The bakery was quiet again. Late evening had settled, casting soft amber across the countertops. The ovens were cooling, the chairs upended on the tables, and the street outside was still. Irene stood at the back, wiping down the long stainless counter. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if the rhythm helped her breathe. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, folded square of paper. On it, in her handwriting, were the words she'd copied from the girl earlier that morning, about someone who was invisible, but only because everyone else forgot how to look. Until one day, someone remembered out loud. She smoothed the paper out on the counter, took a piece of tape from the dispenser, and gently affixed the note to the back wall, just above the oven she used every morning. The same oven that had baked cinnamon bread for a daughter who didn't always understand, and now for strangers who somehow did. She stepped back, looked at it, not for display, not for praise, just a quiet reminder. She turned off the lights one by one, the space growing dimmer with each switch, but the small paper square glowed softly in the oven's residual warmth. Before leaving, she walked to her planner on the front counter, opened to today's date. Below her morning note, she added a single line. "Some truths don't need to be spoken loudly to last." She closed the book, then paused, flipping back 2 pages to one she had marked weeks ago. There, written after the day she moved out of Julie's house, was the sentence, "I am not just convenient. I am still real." She read it again. Then, slowly, she crossed out just one word. Not convenient, not real. She crossed out still. Because now, she didn't need to hold on to who she used to be. She had become someone else. Someone with flour-dusted fingers, a name on a bakery door, and a memory stitched into the pages of children and daughters and strangers alike. As she locked up, a gust of wind brushed past, rattling the bell above the door. She turned briefly, smiled at the sound, then stepped into the night, her silhouette long and upright beneath the glow of the street lamp. She didn't need to be remembered. She had remembered herself. "I no longer measure my life by the rooms I'm welcome in, or by who says my name out loud. These days, I open the bakery just after 6. The light is soft then. Like a secret the morning shares, only with those who rise early enough to notice. The first thing I see is that little note, still taped behind the oven. A child's words, a stranger's insight, and somehow my own truth. Customers come and go. Most don't know my story. Some ask about Ellie's cinnamon, and I smile, offer them a sample and say, "It's a memory recipe." They usually don't ask more, but a few do, and when they do, I tell them the recipe began in a kitchen where I wasn't always heard, but where love still lived quietly under every folded towel and rinsed teacup. Julie visits sometimes, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, just because. She comes early, before the bakery gets busy. We share coffee, she brings Ellie. Sometimes Nathan. We don't talk about the words that were said, not directly, but she asks about my dough. She watches how I slice apples for the turnovers. She listens now. That's enough. One morning, Ellie asked, "Grandma, are you famous now?" I laughed. Why would you think that? She pointed to the small article clipped and taped to the side wall. A neighbourhood write-up. The Cinnamon Corner, a bakery with a past and a heart. I told her, "No, sweet pea, I'm not famous. I'm just remembered, and that's better." I didn't need everyone to see me, just the right ones. Sometimes, people still get me wrong. They assume I'm retired, or lonely, or just passing time, but I don't correct them, because I know who I am now. I'm the woman who stayed, the one who left, the one who made space, the one who took space back. And if someone says I was only ever convenient, I smile, because I know I was more. I was the rhythm, the root, the remembered echo in a house that had forgotten how to hum. And now I hum again, in a space of my own making, with cinnamon in the air and warmth under my nails, and a quiet, full-hearted knowing that sometimes the softest kind of power is simply not vanishing when they expect you to.